We tend to like poetic justice. We like to see liars lied to. We like to see con men get conned. We like to see bullies get bullied, and so on and so forth. We like to think that the scales of cosmic justice somehow hang in the balance, that there is a reaction to every action. Or as the Bible puts it, we reap what we sow. This is why when we get to Genesis 29, no one really feels sorry for Jacob when the deceiver finally gets a taste of his own medicine. So let's take a look at it here in Genesis chapter 29, beginning in verse 1. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. And Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said, "and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home, and there Jacob told him all these things. In these verses, we see that besides being a schemer, Jacob is also a bit of a Budinsky. We read that the shepherds didn't water the flock until everyone was there. And perhaps the reason for this was that there was a large stone that covered the well, and they couldn't move it, and they maybe had to wait for people to come there to help them move it. This is not forwarding for some reason. There we go. Okay. Presumably, they waited for someone to come help them move that stone and then help move him back, and that's what everybody's waiting for. But another reason for the delay might have been some kind of agreement between the well's owner and the shepherd, stipulating that the well could only be used once a day. Because a well was a valuable resource, and a well owner would often set the terms as to how and when the well was to be used. And the shepherds here have gathered early, lining up, as it were, to be the first in line. If this were the case, they would have to wait for the well owner's servants to remove the stone. He probably wanted his servants to remove the stone. And they probably didn't do that until all the shepherds had arrived, so they only had to do this once. Jacob either thinks this is impractical because it's less profitable, it cuts in on the grazing time, or so he suggests they need to water the flocks now and then return to the grazing, or he wants them to water their sheep immediately in order to get rid of them before Rachel arrives so he can meet her with her alone. Now, I have noticed in my life that everyone seems to enjoy it when somebody else, especially a stranger, tells you how you should be doing your job. We all love that when that happens, because we all like to benefit from the vocational advice of complete strangers. Well, for some reason, these shepherds do not seem impressed by Jacob's suggestion, and they inform him they have to wait until all the flocks are gathered, at which time the large stone is removed. The well, it seems, was not to be used at their convenience. Jacob sees Rachel and he decides, hey, I'm going to show this babe what a stud I am. So he removes the large stone by himself. And at that moment, his name was changed from Jacob the heel grabber to Jacob the hernia grabber. He waters the sheep she has brought to the well, and then he kisses her. Now, this is not a romantic kiss. You read this, you might think, oh, that was a romantic kiss. No, it wasn't a romantic kiss, because how presumptuous would that be? Jacob was giving her a family member's greeting type of kiss. And so he kissed her and immediately identified himself as a family member. Then why does he cry? I assume it is because he has found what he's been waiting for. He's gone on this 500-mile journey to find his mother's family, and now that journey is over. Nevertheless, having said that, most commentators do believe that for Jacob, this was love at first sight. And Jacob will soon learn that he and Laban are definitely of the same blood. Let's take a look now at the rest of the chapter, or at least to verse 30. Verse 14, then Laban said to him, you are my own flesh and blood. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I will work for you for 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to lie with her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when the evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I served for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? And Laban replied, well, it's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, and then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. And Jacob did so, and he finished the week with Leah. And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. And Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maidservant. And Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. All right, so Jacob has this month-long stay with Laban, demonstrated to both of them, hey, this is a good working relationship. This could be to our mutual advantage. Both men try to con the other, and only Laban succeeds. You say, well, how did Jacob try to con Laban? Well, Jacob no doubt knew it was customary for the oldest daughter to be married first. So he cuts a deal with Laban to ignore that custom and marry off his younger daughter first. Laban, on the other hand, has taken note of Jacob's fondness for Rachel and has already hatched a scheme to get 14 years of labor out of Jacob. Now, with reference to Leah and Rachel, I believe that Leah is done a great disservice, not just by Jacob, but by many who interpret her weak eyes as a code word for Leah being homely and unattractive. I do not think that it's trying to tell us that Leah was homely. The word that's used here for weak is never used in the Bible in a demeaning way. You'll note in the margin there's an alternate translation that says this word could also be translated tender. She had tender eyes, or she had delicate eyes. And everywhere else that particular word is used, it is translated more along those lines. So Leah had tender or delicate eyes, which suggests her temperament. So let me illustrate what I think is happening here with the movie Gone with the Wind. The story, you no doubt, revolves around Scarlett O'Hara, played by Vivien Leigh, a woman we might describe also as lovely in form and beautiful. There is another character, Melanie Hamilton, played by Olivia de Havilland, whom we might describe as having tender or delicate eyes. In other words, a kind-hearted and gentle woman. Now, in that movie, Ashley Wilkes, played by Leslie Howard, in contrast with Jacob in our story, prefers the gentle and kind-hearted Melanie to the fiery spunk of scarlet. However, in our story, Jacob is more like Rhett Butler, played by Clark Gable, who preferred the fiery spirit of scarlet. In telling us that Leah had tender eyes, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think Moses is trying to convey to us a physical trait necessarily, for in the world in which Jacob lives, the eyes referred to much more than the physical eye. As Shakespeare noted, the eyes are the window of the soul. So, in the Bible, the eyes or the eye is often referred to as portraying someone's personality traits or temperament. So you could portray somebody's arrogance by saying they have haughty eyes. You could portray someone's humility by saying they have lowly eyes. You could portray someone's being kind-hearted by saying they have tender or delicate eyes. So I believe it is in that sense that the eyes of Leah are spoken of. And I would conclude that the disposition of Leah was one of gentleness and tenderness, and Rachel seems to have a much more fiery and aggressive temperament. So what would be the point of making this contrast between Rachel and Leah? Well, to me, it is telling us that Rachel is mostly characterized by her physical attractiveness without any mention of her personal qualities, suggesting that this was Jacob's only reason for his preference of Rachel, because she was lovely in form and beautiful, because we all know men are pigs. So that's basically why he preferred Rachel. And so for 7 years, Jacob waited for the day that he would marry Rachel. At the appointed time, he undoubtedly celebrated the wedding feast by consuming a high degree of wine, which dulled his senses, which Laban was no doubt counting on. This would explain why he's not able to determine the difference between Rachel and Leah at the consummation of the marriage. Plus, she was probably also veiled. And so, as someone pointed out, Jacob went from love at first sight to shock at first light, for in the morning there beside him lay Leah, not Rachel. The deceiver has now been deceived. Now he must return to the bargaining table with Laban. They reach a quick agreement for another 7 years of labor in exchange for marrying Rachel at the end of Leah's bridal week. All right, so let's talk about why did God allow this to happen to Jacob? Is it poetic justice, or is it prevenient grace, the grace that goes before? Some view the events of this chapter as God getting even with Jacob by allowing him to reap what he has sown. He's a deceiver, he gets deceived. Jacob then reaps what he sowed, we might say. Others prefer to understand the sequence of events as God's prevenient grace going ahead of Jacob to instruct him, not to punish him. And maybe it's a both-and situation rather than an either-or situation. Maybe God's prevenient grace is somehow at the same time being manifested in poetic justice. That's sort of how I view what is happening here. Remember, one of Jacob's problems is he chooses to set the timing of events for himself. He mainly considers what makes immediate sense to him. In setting his own timing, Jacob all too easily disregards the customs and the feelings of others around him. An example would be what happened at the well. There was already a system in place and an agreement in place between the well owner and the shepherds as to when the well could be used. Jacob decides, no, I need it now, I need it immediately, and I don't care about the rules because he wants to impress Rachel. He also later further dismisses the norms of the culture and customs in the area by trying to get Laban to marry off his younger daughter before his older daughter. Jacob thinks rules do not apply to him. Okay, let's back up the truck for a minute, and let's imagine that chapter 27 never happened. Jacob never tricked Esau and Isaac, and instead decided to patiently wait for the Lord to work all things out for him to receive the blessing. He didn't scheme and deceive and manipulate to get it. Chapter 27 never happened. Let's say that never happened. Well, if that had never happened, rather than getting a bride this way, how would he have got a bride if chapter 27 never happened? Well, how was his mother, Rebekah, made the wife of Isaac? Isaac, unlike Jacob, had the resources of his father at his disposal. In other words, he was able to provide the dowry for Rebekah's family from the riches of his father Abraham. He did not have to go work for somebody in order to get Rebekah. One of the consequences of Jacob's scheme of deciding to do things now his way is that he had fled from his home empty-handed. He's not able to use the wealth of his father to secure Rachel as his bride, and he had only the work of his hands to offer to Laban. Isaac, by way of contrast, when he was younger, subjected himself to the wisdom of his father, and through the prayer of Abraham's servant, Rebekah was obtained. Jacob went off on his own with none of his father's resources, utilizing his own wisdom, chose the woman with the greatest physical beauty, which, as it turns out, did not require prayer to determine. So we see Jacob is guided more by his personal needs and desires, his hormones. He notes Rachel has another way to say lovely form is she had a lovely figure. He notes she has a lovely figure and she's beautiful. He does not need to seek the Lord's counsel about Rachel as far as he is concerned, as Abraham's servant had done in the selection of Rebekah. The servant of Abraham had asked God to reveal to him who the woman that should be for Isaac would reveal to him, who that woman should be, and the Lord did. None of that happens here with Rachel. In fact, you may have noticed in verses 1 through 30 of Genesis 29, the Lord is not mentioned at all, because the heart wants what the heart wants. And so Jacob sought to overturn the customs of the day and set his own timing, which always appears to be now. I'm just saying it's possible the 14 years of Jacob's indentured labor might have been unnecessary if he had not taken the timing of the matter into his own hands in the first place. And as is so often the case, when we reap, we usually reap in the same kind as we sow. Those who treat others with compassion or without compassion will find little compassion from others. If you don't sow compassion, you won't reap compassion. Those who resort to intimidation and bullying often find themselves sufferers of similar tactics. Those who are only concerned about themselves will often find they are left to themselves. Those who live for the moment will find themselves paying a price that lasts far longer than that moment. Sure enough, the choices we make in life are like the seeds planted in the ground. It may often seem like the choices we make now have no consequences, but wait. We always reap in a different season than we sow. Most of the time, you will find yourself on the receiving end of what you have been giving out. Moses warned, "Be sure your sin will find you out," in Numbers 32, verse 23. Today, we might paraphrase that statement this way: your sin will eventually out you. As I have mentioned several times, I have found in my life, any sin I am not broken over, I am soon broken by. So how did Jacob reap in the same kind as he sowed? Well, the deceiver is deceived. He ignores the principle of the privileges of the firstborn. It was Leah's right to marry first. He had ignored those same principles in his relationship with Esau. But now he's forced to honor that principle by marrying Leah first. So Jacob has been sowing for a long, long time. He's been sowing the seeds of deceit. Now the harvest has come. But having said that, I do not consider Leah to be a blight. I consider Leah to be a blessing. So let's talk about the gracious gift of Leah. Due to the fact that we live in a very romantically oriented culture, most people read this story as the great love story between Jacob and Rachel. And if we're not careful, we find ourselves rooting for Rachel and booing or at least ignoring Leah. Yet a more careful examination of the story reveals that God's main purpose was to bring Leah into Jacob's life, not Rachel. Here again, we see the subtle interplay of divine sovereignty and human will. This is probably the last thought to cross our minds, that Leah was God's choice. But consider this: in the providence of God, and in spite of the deceptiveness of Laban, Leah became Jacob's wife. And it would be Leah, not Rachel, who would become the mother of Judah, who was to be the heir through whom the Messiah would come. Also, Leah is the mother of Levi, who provided the priestly line in later years. Leah gives birth to the six of the 12 tribes of Israel by herself. Now, Rachel later causes trouble for Jacob by stealing her father's household gods when they finally leave. Rachel dies at a relatively early age, and yet she was the younger sister. When she died, she was buried on the way to Bethlehem. Yet Leah and Jacob are buried together. Rachel was buried someplace else. Leah and Jacob are buried in the cave at Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah are also buried. Jacob might not have chosen Leah, but God did. The promised seed to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob came through her, not through Rachel. In the Proverbs, it says, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Many men have discovered having a beautiful wife does not necessarily result in having a beautiful life. Let's talk about Haran, which is the place of delay. Why does Haran symbolize delay for the patriarchs? Every time one of them goes to Haran, it's a place of delay. Remember when the Lord first called Abraham, he told Abraham to leave his family and his country and to go to the place that he would show him. Did he do that? Not really. He went halfway. In Genesis 11:26, this is Abraham's father. After Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the account of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. And while his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, and she was the daughter of Haran, the daughter of both Milcah and Iscah. Verse 30, now Sarai was barren. She had no children. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together, what did he told them to leave his family. But together, Abraham and his family set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. God had not told them to do that. But when they came to Haran, what did they do? They settled there. So he did not go to where God had told him to go. He went halfway and he settled in Haran. So Abraham stays in Haran with his father for 15 years before he leaves from there. And this is in Genesis 12:4. So Abram left as the Lord had told him, sorta, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Now, the name Haran actually means delay. And Haran was the place of delay for both Abraham and Jacob. Abraham delayed there for 15 years, and when he finally goes to Canaan, as the Lord had told him to go in the first place, when he arrives, guess what? There's a famine. So what does Abraham do? He comes down, oh, this is the promised land, Lord? I come down here, there's a famine. So Abram goes down to Egypt. And that is where Sarai found a handmaiden named Hagar, whom she would later offer to Abraham in order to bring forth the child of promise on his own, which was Ishmael. How'd all that work out for everybody? Not so good. Ishmael and Isaac are still fighting to this day. Jacob, because of his deception, has now gone to the city of delay and soon finds himself working 14 years for his uncle, who is also very skilled, it turns out, at deception and manipulation. Why does God allow them to enter the city of delay? Well, let's take a close look at why I think Jacob was allowed to go there. The city of delay usually gives you time to think about how you got there. Going to the city of delay is like God placing you in a spiritual timeout. Jacob has 20 years to think about the course that his life has taken. And I think you and I will find this true for ourselves. Sometimes the Lord has to pull us away from our plans and schemes. He places us in a timeout to ponder the consequences of the choices we have made, or at least give us the opportunity to do that. This is discipline, it's not punishment. By disciplining us, God is granting us an opportunity to attain wisdom. Another reason God allowed Jacob to go to the city of delay, and this is important. Another reason he allowed him to go to the city of delay, because Jacob needed to be humbled in his area of perceived strength. Jacob, no doubt, was proud of his keen mind and his cunning, his ability to talk people in and out of things. No doubt he always felt very much in control of most of the situations he faced. All of the deals that Jacob negotiated always had one result: advantage Jacob. All that changes once he meets good old Uncle Laban, who somehow inexplicably gets the best of him. Jacob has negotiated a deal where the advantage ultimately was not his. This time he's on the short end of the stick. God is humbling him at his area of perceived strength. He has taken Jacob's perceived strength and humbled him with it. Just like he did with Peter, who confidently boasted that he would never abandon the Lord, even if every single one of these other disciples did. He was humbled at his area of perceived strength, just as he did with Paul. Paul's area of strength was in Jewish rhetoric. So did the Lord make him an apostle to the Jews? No. He made him apostle to the Gentiles, an area of weakness. And God will do the same thing to you and I. If you don't humble yourself before the Lord, he will often take whatever you consider to be your perceived strength and use it to humble you until you figure it out. Because let's face it, God really has no interest in using you in your strengths. God is not interested in a strong you. Because if you feel strong, you will depend upon your strength, not his strength. God desires to bring us down so that we will understand our confidence has to be in him alone. So he touches you where you think you are strong. Because when you feel weak, then, maybe for the first time, you look to him to be your strength. And his strength is perfected through weakness. Some of us will never allow ourselves to get weak enough to discover that. Again, this is more than simply a matter of God putting you in your place. It is not some form of poetic justice. It is really prevenient grace. God is doing this for your own good. Because only through this process can you truly begin to develop godly character and learn to be dependent upon the Lord. Was Jacob treated unfairly? Yes. Then why did God allow it? Because God knew that was the only way he could begin to develop godly character in Jacob's life. That's the only way he would learn this lesson. The hard, painful way. That's usually how I have to learn my lessons. For the most part, our character is not forged in the painless times of life, but in the most difficult times of life. I've heard it said, when you are in trouble and you feel circumstances are piling up against you, the key to survival is be a student, not a victim. When you're facing consequences for poor choices, be a student, not a victim. When you're dealing with difficult people, be a student, not a victim. Truth be told, for most of us, the road to the promised land goes through the city of Haran, the place of delay. In the course of our lives, most of us will make several extended trips to Haran. In Haran, the Lord holds up a mirror to us that we might see ourselves as we really are, perhaps for the first time. As I mentioned last week, sometimes God brings us to the land of broken dreams because he wants to build a new dream, a better dream. If Haran is the place of delay and the land of broken dreams, it is also the place where the Lord prepares us for what he has prepared for us. So God sovereignly allowed Jacob to be in these circumstances and to face these consequences with difficult people. Will Jacob be a student or will he be a victim? Will Jacob see that the Lord is also giving him opportunities and providing gracious provisions within these difficult circumstances? Only time will tell. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, as we now consider your word, prayer partners are in the back for those who would like prayer this morning. Prayer partners are there to pray with you and for you. Lord, some of us are stubborn. It takes us a long time to be humbled in our area of perceived strength. And the longer we refuse to be humbled, the more we choose to try to be strong in ourselves rather than to see you as our strength, we will remain in the city of delay. That is the place where you are disciplining us for our good. If we would wise up and look around, we would see the gracious provision you've made to us, even while we are in that city. Lord, I know many times in my own life, I have had to be humbled in my area of perceived strength. It's always embarrassing. It's never pleasant. But it is also very necessary in order for me to develop any godlike character at all. My aim in life is not really more of Jesus and less of Jeff. It really is all of Jesus and none of Jeff. But alas, that is a hard lesson to learn. I pray we might learn it. Pray for anyone here who feels like they've been in a place of delay, that they might reevaluate their circumstances this morning in light of this text. We'll be quick to give you the praise and glory for all these things. In Jesus' name, and all God's people said,